agencies. Now we're going to call it to order. Good morning, all of you. It's good to be with all of you today. I'm pleased to present the fiscal year 2016 HUD bill to the subcommittee for your consideration, with the goal of a favorable motion to the full committee, obviously. In total resources, the bill before you provides $108.7 billion in budgetary authority and obligation limitation for the various programs in the Department of Transportation and Housing and Urban Development and related agencies. CBO has scored us at the set 302B levels of $55.27 billion in discretionary budget authority, which is $1.5 billion above the enacted FY15 levels. Now, when you compare that to appropriated dollars, this bill is really $25 million over 2015. I want to thank Ranking Member Price for his willingness to discuss the issues and the challenges of the programs, the funding levels under our jurisdiction, for his willingness to always sit down and work with me. Again, I thank you so much for your indulgence. I'm hopeful, and I think that there should be a few bright spots of common ground in the funding levels that we were able to achieve. And again, I cannot thank the ranking member enough. I'd also particularly want to thank Chairman Rogers for his support. By the way, your very generous allocation to this subcommittee. Many of the financial holes that we face in crafting this bill were due to factors, frankly, that are beyond our control. And the additional funds went to backfill the unpredictable CBO scoring and inflation factors of the housing programs, of various housing programs. Also want to thank Ranking Member Lowy for her contributions to making the safety programs, we've heard a lot about those, right? The safety programs a priority in this bill. Thank you, Mrs. Lowy. And I look forward to continue to working with her. I'd like to also thank all of you, the esteemed members of this subcommittee, for your contributions in the hearings and your letters and your contacts with me. We held 6 hearings, Mr. Chairman, as you know, and the members of the committee asked really good, relevant, probing questions. We worked to address as many of your concerns, again, through the funding levels and also report language. I would be remiss if I didn't thank both our personal staffs, all of our personal staffs, and the committee staff. As you were saying, Mr. Chairman, we're blessed with having great staff. The bill was made available online yesterday morning, so your staffs have had the opportunity to pore over the bill and the report language prior to today, so you know what we are proposing. And however, I'd like to highlight some of the key major areas, if I may. We meet the oblum levels contained in the current MAP 21 extension for surface programs. We support the authorizing committees proposing an extension bill to carry these important programs forward. We provide $100 million for the new Tiger grant, grant awards. We provide $129 million over last year for FAA operations to ensure a safe and orderly operation of the air traffic control system. For FAA Next Gen, for those investments, the bill includes $931 million. Every single one of FTA's signed full funding grants agreements is funded, consistent with the agreed upon payout schedules, and all of the proposed small starts are also funded. Furthermore, we provide $250 million for up-and-coming agreements and also $40 million for core capacity projects. CDBG is funded at last year's level of $3 billion, which is $200 million more than the actual request. Home is funded at $900 million. Other housing programs are funded at levels sufficient to continue providing a HUD-assisted housing option. Now, to be able to meet these priorities, we made some strategic reductions to capital accounts, and we scrubbed the bill for, frankly, overhead savings. Further, this bill has no new programs, no new fees, and almost all of the S&E accounts are at last year's level or lower. So I'm sure that we're going to hear remarks about needing more money. But I'd like to remind everybody of the following. If we were to write a bill that the number were to exceed the budget resolution, the sequestration that would hit in 2016 by law would not take into consideration our priorities, We would not be able to protect the transportation systems that our nation depends on, or provide housing to millions of American families. This bill takes steps to make sure that our priorities, all of your priorities, are adequately funded. So obviously, as in all subcommittee markups, I would prefer if members held on to any amendments until full committee. But I really welcome your comments, and I would ask for your support in moving this piece to the next step in the process. With that, and once again, thanking him for his willingness to work with me, I would like to recognize the esteemed ranking member, Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your kind words, and I want to return the compliment because you've had a good first run here as the chairman of this subcommittee. The process that we've gone through has been open. You've been accessible, receptive to concerns of subcommittee members on both sides of the aisle. So it's been a pleasure working with you, and I congratulate you on the progress made thus far. We're operating under very, very serious constraints, as you probably know better than anyone, however. I stated at the full committee markup that the 302B allocations are inadequate for many, many subcommittees, including this one. There is an increase over last year's allocation, but the reality is that once you factor in declining FHA receipts and increased Section 8 renewal costs, that goes away. In fact, the bill is actually $1.5 billion below last year's funding level. So you, all of us, have been dealt a very difficult hand. And as a result, at least at that point, as this bill envisions it, we are not investing nearly what we should in our housing and transportation infrastructure. We're not investing enough to sustain it, let alone expand it. At some point, the House is going to need to agree that our country's strength is not just measured by the size of our military. It's measured by the number of scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs we produce to drive the growth of cutting-edge industries. It's measured by the advance of our research against dread diseases, all kinds of research. It's measured by our efforts to make our infrastructure, once again, the envy of the world. We had a wonderful bipartisan gathering last night at the Library of Congress, where we heard a distinguished historian recollect the work of General and President Dwight Eisenhower. And one of the features of that presentation was really the greatest infrastructure initiative of the 20th century, which President Eisenhower, along with congressional collaborators, was behind, the interstate highway system. What an investment in the future! How it's the makings of greatness, and I think a lot of us need to ask: when does our country, how can our country recapture that greatness, that sense of what a great country does to build itself up, to strengthen our economy? We can't just wring our hands and say we're broke. First of all, we're not broke. There are ways to get a hold of our situation. These are man-made dilemmas. But it's our job, I think, in this body and on this committee to recapture that vision and to figure a way through this. I'm afraid this bill doesn't do it, but I think in our discussion today and in the full committee we can line out some of the possible paths forward. I hope so. We need a broad budget agreement. We've had broad budget agreements. We had one that balanced the budget in the 1990s. Balanced the budget, paid off $400 billion of this country's debt, and had a roaring economy in the bargain. But a comprehensive agreement, apparently, in this political environment is not to be had. The House majority refuses to address the main drivers of the deficit. That's tax expenditures. That's entitlement spending. Instead, they've returned again and again and again to appropriations, and especially critical domestic investments, to bear the whole brunt of deficit reduction. That's a disaster. It's a disaster for our economy. It's a disaster for the work of most of our appropriations subcommittees. So let's make no mistake about it. That's the environment in which we're operating today. So I appreciate the majority's plan to push forward with all 12 appropriations bills. It's important that we do that, but we should not pretend that these bills reflect the kind of broad budget agreement that we desperately need. In fact, they fall short of what we need to do to meet our challenges as a nation. Now, just quickly on some of the details of this bill. I want to thank the chairman for including $100 million for the Tiger program, $20 million for the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative. Both, of course, are, we hope, placeholders for future reference. Both programs, of course, could utilize a lot more funding than that to address the great need to improve and modernize our transportation and housing infrastructure. But I'm pleased they're funded, at least nominally, in this base bill. I think that's a good sign that going forward we can work together to improve the funding in these areas as well as others. But these are our two critical areas. The bill before us provides adequate funding to maintain the critical safety functions of the Transportation Department. It provides support for existing tenants in HUD-assisted housing. But the price for that, I'm afraid, is to make deep cuts in capital programs within DOT and within HUD, the very programs that create jobs and boost the economy. On the housing side, the bill contains a $1.68 billion for the Public Housing Capital Fund. That's a $225 million cut from last year. If enacted, this level would be about the same as the funding level in 1989. Given that new maintenance needs accrue at $3.5 billion a year, the level of funding would cover less than half of the annual maintenance needs while doing nothing to address the $25 billion backlog of deferred maintenance. That would be $25 billion. In transportation, the bill cuts the Federal Aviation Administration's capital program by $355 million below the request, $100 million below last year. Funding at these levels will hamper FAA's ability to maintain and improve aging facilities and slow down development progress on the agency's next-gen program. The bill also cuts funding for Amtrak by 12% below last year, slashes the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program by 8% below last year, 41% below the President's request. Finally, just a word about policy riders. Too many are attached to this bill. Controversial riders generally shouldn't be included on an appropriations bill, and those on truck length and weight have no place in particular, given that the authorizers are actively working on a reauthorization proposal. In addition, the bill continues to delay full implementation of DOT's hours of service rule, despite the fact that the study we requested last year is underway. While the bill funds DOT's safety functions on the one hand, these modifications risk putting the bottom line of the trucking industry above driver safety. With a multi-year bipartisan broad budget agreement, which of course we desperately need, I remain hopeful that this bill can be improved as it goes through the appropriations process, and that we ultimately can remove many of the controversial riders. So I look forward to working with the chairman, with all members, as we move forward so that we can craft a final bill that can garner bipartisan support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I too look forward to working with you. Now I'm pleased to recognize he's got to be probably the busiest person up here these days. He's trying to get all these bills, the work of the committee completed. The chairman, I mentioned, thank you for your generosity with this subcommittee. A lot of folks talk about regular order. Chairman Rogers is doing it. So thank you for your leadership, and I learned every single day from you, so it's a pleasure to have you here, a privilege to have you here. You're recognized, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your maiden voyage as chairman of this subcommittee. He's a cardinal, and he's done a great job. This is a tough bill, and I want to congratulate you for negotiating the rapids and the strictures that you had to go through. And to my friend David Price, who we've had the pleasure of serving together on many subcommittees, especially Commerce Justice, for all those years. Can you hear me okay?
Needs to be closer. Needs to be closer.
Closer? Somebody's mic's on.
Yeah, no, not this one. Let's swap microphones.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. I think they can hear me okay. Tough bill, think you've negotiated the straits as well as you possibly could. Funds at $55.25 billion. The bill supports key programs that will help ensure our airways and highways remain accessible and safe. And our nation's most vulnerable citizens have access to affordable housing options. So I'm proud this bill strikes an appropriate balance by prioritizing programs that provide critical services to the American public while taking a targeted, thoughtful approach to reducing non-essential or inefficient programs. We're all keenly aware of the important role transportation plays in our nation's economy. And once again, the Highway Trust Fund is expected to go into the red this summer. But we remain hopeful that a solution can be devised by our colleagues on the authorizing committee, and in fact they are working as we speak. In the meantime, this bill would ensure that surface program funding levels are consistent with the MAP 21 levels so that state and local agencies can plan their work and then work their plan. I'm also pleased that this bill includes robust funding for the Federal Aviation Administration to ensure that our airways are safe and to help increase efficiency and timeliness for all air travelers. To this end, the FAA Capital Programs funding is targeted to next-gen programs promising the most immediate benefit. And in fact, the authorizing committee, as you know, is exploring a big-time overhaul of FAA, among others. So this, Mr. Chairman, may change during this year's bill. The legislation provides ample support for initiatives that help provide access to affordable housing and counseling services for those who need it most. There's $19.9 billion in tenant-based rental assistance, which funds housing vouchers for low-income families, to ensure that all families that are currently served by the program will continue to be served. For project-based rental assistance, the bill allocates $10.6 billion, which will pay for a full 12 months of contract liability. Finally, the bill fully funds all elderly and disabled contract renewals to ensure that we maintain our commitment to our most vulnerable citizens. You also support critical programs aimed at community planning and development. $3 billion for the Community Development Block Grant Program that's utilized by communities across the country to meet their unique community development needs. The Self-Help Ownership Opportunity Program, SHOP, and the Section 4 Capacity Building Program are provided with $50 million in the bill. In my rural district, the so-called SHOP program has allowed numerous low-income families to become homeowners by contributing their own sweat equity. And it works, and it provides poor people with good homes and allows them to invest their time and effort in building that home. In addition, staff, we paid $10 zillion for this new sound system. And I think we're better off without it. But that, the Home Investment Partnership Program, $900 million in this bill. This important investment offers communities the ability to design and implement strategies tailored to their own needs and priorities. Many states and localities often partner with nonprofit groups to help build, buy, or rehabilitate affordable housing. So I want to thank both of you for your work, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, but also the other members of the subcommittee. This is a collaborative effort, and you've worked it well. And I can't say enough about staff. On the full committee level and the subcommittee levels, these people are dedicated public servants, and they work day and night. And take a lot of the heat that would otherwise go on us. So we want to thank the staff for all the great work. This is the earliest start, I'm told, of the appropriating process, at least in recorded history back to '74. We have 2 bills on the floor today, the first 2. You're marking up here in the subcommittee, and tomorrow we have ledge branch going to full committee. So you're off to a flying start, and we hope our brethren and sisterin over in the other chamber have finally awakened from their drowse, and we'll do a little work to match what you've done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for good work.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Thank you so much. Now I would like to recognize the full committee. Remember I mentioned how Chairman Rogers is probably the busiest person on the Hill. Well, she's probably as busy. I was going to say it's going to be a busy couple days, but it's not. It's probably going to be a busy few months for you. Great to have you here. You're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you and Ranking Member Price in your new roles as Chairman and Ranking Member of the Subcommittee, and I thank them, and of course, full committee Chairman Rogers for their work. And I'm sure if it were left to Chairman Rogers and his Ranking Member and all of us, we could finish this process without approaching Christmas holiday, and I hope we can succeed, because I know how hard everyone on this committee is working. And I also want to agree with my chair, as I often do, and thank our staffs who work so hard to make this all possible. Let me just say, this chairman has worked so hard to be attentive to concerns of members, and I really want to thank you. I want to sincerely thank him for working with me to highlight grade crossing safety in the aftermath of the horrible Metro-North crash that killed 6 people in February. With your assistance, I hope we will be able to increase public awareness of the dangers at active grade crossings and require states to be more proactive in addressing the most hazardous crossings. The programs under this jurisdiction of this subcommittee are some of the most important, improving housing, creating infrastructure jobs for hard-working American families, and ensuring safe and adequate transportation networks for goods, commuters, and travelers. As such, this bill is a prime illustration of the painful impact of indiscriminate budget cuts. The President requested a robust increase for this bill in fiscal year 2016, calling on Congress to provide the critical investments necessary to accelerate and sustain economic growth. Unfortunately, the bill before us takes a giant step backward in addressing our infrastructure needs. I'm confident, I am absolutely confident, that the chairman would have written an entirely different bill were he not forced to live under the inadequate funding caps. I'd like to remind my colleagues of Secretary Fox's testimony from February, when he focused on the trends and challenges facing our country over the next 30 years. Looking ahead, we will have to accommodate a population that grows by 70 million people, more than the combined populations of New York, Florida, and Texas. Freight volumes that will increase by 45% to 29 billion tons, and more than 163 billion in needed annual investments to improve the condition and performance of our nation's highway and transit systems. And frankly, we cannot meet these challenges by slashing investments in Tiger, Amtrak, transit, air traffic modernization. Before I turn to housing, it's important to mention the plentiful legislative riders. Christmas came early for the trucking industry. Longer, heavier trucks, stalled enforcement of hours of service rules, inadequate insurance requirements, controversial riders, including those on foreign policy that we will discuss at full committee, have no place in an already difficult appropriations process. And as I said during the consideration of the energy and water bill last week, we already have enough problems determining funding levels for these important programs. Frankly, these riders just make that job harder. With regard to housing, adequate funding to renew the existing vouchers is provided, but it doesn't provide sufficient funding to meet our country's actual housing needs. Significantly cutting lead hazard control will slow progress on eliminating household toxins. This successful program has resulted in lower lead poisoning rates, better educational and behavior outcomes for children. Certainly now is not the time to slow our progress. And while the chairman has provided sufficient funding for home, I'm concerned about how it is paid for. On the surface, Home and the Housing Trust Fund appear to both be affordable housing programs, but the Housing Trust Fund targets the lowest of the low income, while Home focuses on low to moderate incomes. We have a lack of supply of affordable housing at all income levels, but I'm concerned that by taking money dedicated for the Housing Trust Fund, we will perpetuate another gap in the spectrum of affordable housing. I look forward to working with the chairman as we move through the process. This bill could easily be one that we can all support and be proud of, with a long-term bipartisan budget agreement that provides relief from draconian sequester levels and the elimination of controversial riders. So I thank the chairman again. You have been so cooperative, and it's been a pleasure working with you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mrs. Lowy. I, again, also look forward to continue to working with you, and I cannot thank you enough in particular for, as you mentioned today, your involvement on some of the key safety issues. So thank you very much. The bill is now open for amendments, so does anyone wish to offer any amendments at this time? Or to be heard on the bill, on any issues in the bill? Any concerns, anything that you guys want to talk about? All right, seeing none, Mr. Chairman, before I go to the next step, I do, when I look around the table and the folk, and also the ranking member, the individual members that you have appointed to the subcommittee have made my job a lot easier. They are hands-on, they are aggressive, but they've been wonderful to work with, so I thank both of you.
We knew you were going to need help.
I was going to need all the help I can get. That's right. That's exactly right. So, and you provided it. So, if there is no further discussion, and on that note, the chair now recognizes Mr. Yoder for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it, so the motion is agreed to. I remind members and staff that copies of the bill and the report must be left here on the table, so please do not take it with you. I also ask unanimous consent that the staff be permitted to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and report without objection, so ordered. All right, and with nothing else on the table, the subcommittee is now adjourned. Thank you very, very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Good
Mr. Chairman.
work.
Good work.